When his followers asked Jesus to tell them what were the signs that would indicate the coming of his kingdom, Jesus told them to look for a number of signs, but one in particular is often overlooked. In fact, most people don't even see it as a sign of the second coming at all, and among those who do, they often take it for granted. Today, we see this sign on the verge of fulfillment, and Jesus said, once it is, the end will come. Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is the most overlooked sign of the second coming, or at least that's my opinion, that it's the most overlooked sign of the second coming. The Bible doesn't specifically say that's what it is, but I feel that it is. So I'm not going to tease you with what is the sign. We're going to dive right in and we're going to look at what Jesus said. This is from Matthew 24, verse 14. Jesus says, "And the good news about the kingdom will be preached throughout the whole world so that all nations will hear it, and then the end will come." So what is the good news? The good news is that while we were still sinners, Jesus Christ gave his life. He died on the cross, shed his blood in order to forgive our sins so that we may live again. He rose again on the third day. He lives today. He's in heaven preparing a place for us, and he's coming back soon. That's the gospel. And that gospel will be preached to all the nations according to Jesus. Now, why is this the most overlooked sign? I think it's often taken for granted by many of us because nobody listening to this right now was born in the 19th century or earlier. Most people have been around for the last 100 years or less, and they just sort of take for granted that, well, yeah, the gospel is being preached in every nation right now. What's the big deal? We feel it's always been this way, but it hasn't always been this way. It was not always this way, and it was a very bold proclamation for a Jewish carpenter from a tiny little town on the outskirts of a forgotten about province of the Roman Empire with a handful of fishermen as followers to say, my message will be preached to all the nations of the world. Think of how incredibly amazing and how impossible that would be if Jesus were anyone other than who he said he was and who he is, which is the Messiah, the Son of God. So let's look at this excerpt from my book, Signs of the Second Coming. It says, a bold prediction. Now think about that for a moment. That's a bold prediction. This is in reference to Jesus saying, the gospel, the good news will be preached to all nations. Jesus said that all nations will hear the gospel of his kingdom. Due to the benefit of hindsight, most people today shrug this off as no big deal. After all, the gospel's everywhere, right? But remember, Jesus made this proclamation in the early 1st century, almost 2,000 years ago. At best, he had several thousand followers at the time, and the overwhelming majority of those followers were Jewish people living in the land of Israel. Few ever traveled outside of the region. There were no films of his miracles, and the Sermon on the Mount was not broadcast. We do know that some Greeks in the book of John asked about him, so word of Jesus certainly traveled. But the world was a big place. Certainly the people of China, Japan, North America, South America, and most of Africa had never heard of Jesus. In fact, the people of Israel were totally unaware that entire continents existed. North America, South America, Australia, Antarctica, these were all unknown places. So the idea that a carpenter and some fishermen could spread a message to the ends of the earth was a bold claim. Some would say an impossible claim. Yet that's exactly what we see today. And again, we know today that that message is being preached around the earth precisely because Jesus is who he said he was, which is the Messiah, the Son of God. So we see this message spreading around the earth today, but it wasn't always this way. For the first 1,600 years of Christianity, the gospel was largely confined to the area in and around the Mediterranean Sea. We're talking about Europe, Western Asia, North Africa. After the Reformation, there was a fire ignited in some people to become missionaries, to go out and spread the gospel, to follow the commands of Jesus, to make disciples of all nations. We saw Columbus discover the New World, and that led to missionaries going to North and South America. And since then, we've seen the gospel spreading and spreading. We've seen technology enable people to get to areas that they otherwise couldn't get to. And then we've seen television, radio, the internet, ebooks, the proliferation of publishing, traditional publishing, all sorts of things helping to get the gospel out. Think of this. I'm in a closet right now, taking the gospel to the whole world. People all over the world will watch this video, and I'm just a guy standing in a closet talking into a webcam. That's an explosion in the spread of the gospel. We're seeing it being taken to all nations. We're on the verge of fulfillment of this prophecy. How close are we? I don't know for sure, but we're a whole lot closer than we were 400 years ago, 100 years ago, even 50 years ago. And Jesus said, when the gospel is preached to all nations, then the end will come. So we are near the end, guys. So don't listen to all these people who say, how is the gospel being preached to the world a sign of the second coming? That's always been the case. It has not always been the case. Think of Peter's prophecy. We went over this. This is from 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 3 through 4. We did a video on this a few weeks back. It says, Peter says, most importantly, I want to remind you that in the last days scoffers will come, mocking the truth and following their own desires. They will say, what happened to the promise that Jesus is coming again? From before the times of our ancestors, everything has remained the same since the world was first created. So think about that, and think about that in the context of the gospel being preached to all nations. Is today the same as it's always been? That what we see today with the gospel being preached all over and all the places that it's being preached, is that what we saw 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago? Is today the same as it has always been? No, absolutely not. We are on the verge of seeing the fulfillment of this prophecy, and Jesus said when we do, the end will come, meaning he is right at the door. He's coming back soon, guys. That is the good news. That is the good news of the good news. Jesus is coming back. We are on the verge. We are in the season of his return. Jesus said, when you see all these signs converge, you know that I'm right at the door. And this was one of the signs that he talked about, and we're seeing it. Yet it passes so many people by. They overlook it, especially among Christians. They think, well, this has always been the case my whole life. People have been talking about Jesus and the gospel, so how can this be a sign? But they don't step back and take a look at the big picture. They miss the forest through the trees because they're standing on this exponential curve of the explosion of the gospel. And when you're standing on one point on that curve, you can't see the big picture. You can't see what's really happening. So guys, there's reason to be joyful and excited for the times we live in, because this is just another indication that we live in the season of the Lord's return. He's coming back soon. So make sure to take advantage of every moment you have before he does to tell others about Jesus and to show the light of Christ to a world in need. Guys, make sure to like this, share this, and God willing, I'll see you tomorrow. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to sign up for my free monthly newsletter and get your copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Just follow the link in the description to get your free book. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.